Hello, everybody. I'm a practicing therapist and a doctoral student of psychology. Today, I wanted to go over signs that you actually might be masking your autism. And it may come from a variety of different aspects, and we're going to go over that in this video. But first, let's talk about what is actually masking. From my understanding and what a lot of individuals classify this as, when an individual actually suppresses their autistic traits or traits that would show up more prominently as an individual who has autism to fit into societal norms. And unfortunately, this can be very risky because these individuals may feel like they don't belong in either category, and they may always be battling with shame. And that can be unfortunate because there's nothing to be ashamed of, at least from my perspective. And I hope that a lot of you guys agree that this is not something that you can control. This is the way you are made. And rather than masking it, there should be some type of acceptance. I understand if masking makes some individuals comfortable, but I also think it can contribute to a lot of negative feelings as well. What do you guys think? So let's talk about, why do people actually mask? Well, the first one we kind of already touched on: social pressure to conform. Another trait that I notice a lot when I'm practicing, and this is things that individuals have shared with me, is actually some of them actually do it because they're afraid of being bullied or excluded, which I think, means that there was probably some experience where this could have, occurred, or simply the fact that they're seeing that this is a possibility. So they're struggling to make sure that they're not harmed in any sort of way, okay? The next one is actually something that a patient brought to me, a couple of them, and I hadn't really considered it in too much detail until this was brought to me. And I always try to be careful with these types of things just because I am a person who does not have autism. Rather, I am somebody who's just studying these types of things in school. So I always try to be careful. But one patient mentioned, or a couple said, desire to succeed in actually like school or work or certain settings, where they actually feel like if they don't mask, they won't be able to succeed in these situations. And I can find that in a very interesting perspective. I can't speak to it personally, but does any of you guys feel like that? Is that a common feeling? Let me know. And another one that a lot of patients bring up as well is they don't want to be perceived as different or weird, actually. And so by them masking their autism, they actually feel like they won't be excluded and they'll be able to succeed. So it really feels like society is not really what they feel. It's not really on their side, which can be really challenging because you're battling two different perspectives all the time. So why not we talk about some of these cases and these aspects? And before we do, I do want to mention many cases that I have, and probably a lot of folks in general, masking actually begins early in childhood and you might not even realize it. So it's kind of like a survival mechanism, which is why I feel like making this video is helpful to you guys to at least know what's going on, because you might not realize it's happening, or you might have some suspicion and you just need more clarity, because it takes up a lot of energy covering up and masking yourself. And I imagine that there's a part of you that wants to be accepted for who you are. And so that's kind of the aim of this video, but I want to word everything delicately. At least that's my attempt. So forgive me for anything I say too harsh, and I'm always working on it, okay? But the first one is actually something that many patients have brought to me, and it's pretending not to notice or pretending not to feel their sensory overload, where they actually literally might ignore that overwhelming sensory experience, even when it causes them discomfort. So they are almost literally forcing themselves in situations that they feel uncomfortable with, simply because if they can't handle it, it is a sign, obviously, that points them in the direction of having autism, and they're afraid that those who do not have autism can also see that as well, or that they just might be able to recognize truly that they may be autistic and they're not ready for that yet, right? And so this is something I see a lot. The next one is something that is very, very, very common. It's practicing facial expressions or tone of voice to seem more natural or conforming, or somebody who they perceive to be more common. Sometimes I hear patients say something along the lines of they feel like they're the only person who feels like this. And so they feel very uncommon. But I do think that it's important to recognize if you feel like that and you're a person watching this video, that you're not alone. I've heard that with many patients say that. And so they feel like they have to practice facial expressions or tone of voice to fit more in the crowd or seem more natural or more like other people, right? Because that's the point of masking. You mask who you are to fit something else, another, what you perceive as a norm. And I'm not blaming you. It's a survival mechanism, right? The next one is forcing themselves, that like literally forcing yourself to make eye contact with another individual despite discomfort. And so you might do this because you tell yourself, okay, if I don't make eye contact, somebody might realize what's going on. And that's not necessarily what you're feeling, but you might just think, okay, maybe everyone has to do that, or I don't know why I have to do this, but I have to fit in, right? Because you probably have been doing this since you were young. And I even have patients who they've been diagnosed with autism since they were a child, and still they do these things because they feel like they don't really fit anywhere. They feel like, some patients have reported to me, they don't feel like they're autistic enough. I've heard that before. And I actually want to make a video on that at one point as well, because it's very common. And I feel like a lot of individuals who mask autism have that feeling as well. So I want to do another video on that as well. But forcing yourself to make eye contact is pretty common. The next one is actually rehearsing conversations or mimicking other social cues. So you're trying to prepare yourself for situations that you don't feel comes naturally to you. However, you feel like it comes naturally to others. So you're rehearsing or prepping in advance, which can make you feel more like you're conforming, but at the same time, you're putting so much energy into something that's not you, right? And that's that masking aspect. The next one is that it's kind of like in a conversation, okay? You're participating in conversation and you're smiling or laughing at maybe a right time or a perspective that you think a person who does not have autism may laugh or smile at, even though it feels unnatural to you. So you wouldn't naturally laugh or smile at this time, but you feel like it's appropriate because you've already, to some extent, rejected a little bit of your natural traits without realizing it's survival mechanism, right? And so you're still continuing to mask. The next one is you might actually use default phrases, kind of relying on those phrases to carry a conversation instead, and also to fill the silences, right? And it can actually cause distress if somebody asks you to elaborate because you're just kind of using these as like a filler. So example of these phrases might be like, that's wild, that's interesting, I feel that, I know what you mean, I hear that, things like that. That's wild is really common nowadays, right? But that's interesting, I feel that, I feel you, I hear what you're saying. And so if somebody tells you, hey, what do you mean by that? Or are you hearing me? That might cause uncomfort because you're just using those things to fill that silence, and you're not really understanding the response just because everybody operates differently, but you're trying to fit in that conversation, but you're not really sure what to say or what to do. The next one is actually very similar, where you might actually pretend to listen and you might nod or maintain eye contact, but mentally you're actually disengaged from the conversation. And it's very similar to using those default phrases, right? That's interesting, that's wild, I hear you, I feel you, right? Because it's very hard for individuals who have autism to connect in these sort of ways. It's just the way that people are made. Everybody's different. And so you've used these techniques to mask your autism instead of kind of show who you really are, right? Probably because some people might not understand and might take it wrong, and that might be a lot for you as well. So you're just trying to manage what you can, because a lot of times autism, and still to this day, is pretty misunderstood, right? When I'm going to school right now for my PhD, and looking back at the way things were even 10, 15 years ago, just looking at the way the curriculum was, or articles or research, or just in general, this is all evolving. We're learning more about it. It's more acceptable, but still there's that concept that a lot of people may have autism and they feel like it's something they don't want to admit they have because they're not accepted in society. Because a lot of times these people may have been looked down upon to some extent. mental health in general. And that's hard for me to say because I work in mental health. I'm a therapist, and I don't want people to feel like that, which is why I make videos, because I just want somebody, anybody, even one person, to feel like they're allowed to be themselves and it's a safe space. The next one is avoiding your need for a specific routine. Most individuals who have autism, they tend to have a very specific routine, but they're denying that simply because they feel like it's not acceptable, it's not allowed, and they're masking those things because they feel like if they adhere to this specific routine, they will be subjected to being perceived as different, which could be subjected into even more negative connotations down the line. The next one is something that I don't know if all of you guys feel, but I have had quite a few patients report this one. And so I feel like at least somebody's going to fit it. You guys might force yourself to eat food that you don't like. And this is pretty common because a lot of individuals who have autism might be very specific or particular about textures, taste, flavor, the way a food looks, the timing of when they eat. And so they don't want to cause a fuss, or they're continuing masking, and so they may force themselves. And a lot of this might be happening so subconscious or even second nature type, where you don't realize that all of this means that you're masking because you've done it ever since you were little. And the last one is actually really similar. You might force yourself to wear clothing or material that makes you uncomfortable, but you still do it because you don't recognize that you're in that survival mode where you're not feeling comfortable with your own self. You feel like you're not allowed to because you have felt rejected to some extent, okay? And I think the reason why it's very important to recognize why you might be masking autism is probably because you feel like you're not allowed to have autism, but also at the same time, maybe your family just didn't understand. And so what I sometimes see is patients who have autism and they realize it now is because their family, their mother, their father, whoever, kind of tried to pressure them out of these characteristics. And so it was shaped and modeled, not on purpose necessarily, but now the child has grown up in a situation where they are always continuously masking. And sometimes it can be really hard to take that mask off. But I did want to make this video to help somebody. I tried to word it delicately, but I apologize if it didn't come across as well. This is a well-intended video, and I hope this video was helpful to somebody. Please like, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.